Do you think I'm worth saving? The shaking gunslinger asked the Lakota woman. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold and orange, spilling its warm light across the rolling plains. A gentle wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying the faint smell of earth and smoke from distant fires. Somewhere far away, birds sang their final songs before the evening settled in. It was a peaceful world, but not for the man who walked alone along the dusty trail. His steps were slow, uneven, and hesitant, as if each footfall required effort, not only to move forward but to survive the memories that clung to him like shadows. He was a gunslinger, a man known across many settlements, not for the good he had done, but for the fear he had inspired. People whispered stories of him in small towns, mostly about the things he had seen and done, though no one could truly know the weight he carried in his own heart. The man's shoulders were hunched, not just from the days-long journey, but from years of carrying regrets that had never been light enough to set down. His hands trembled slightly as he walked, though it was not the cold that caused the shaking. It was something far deeper, the tremor of guilt, of longing for something he thought he could never have, of hope so fragile that he dared not speak it aloud. Ahead he saw movement, a flicker of life near the edge of the forest that bordered the plains. Curious, he approached slowly, careful not to startle anyone. As he came closer, he realized it was not a town or a house, but a small Lakota encampment. Smoke rose in thin, curling streams from several fires, and the faint sound of laughter drifted across the air. Children played near the edge of the camp, their laughter mingling with the soft sound of animals and pens nearby. Women moved quietly among the tents, speaking to one another in gentle voices, their hands busy with cooking, weaving, and tending to the needs of their families. The scene was calm, organized, and alive, but it felt foreign to him, a world so different from the one he had known. He paused at the edge of the camp, uncertain. He had never entered a place like this before, never been welcomed without suspicion or fear. And yet, something in the way the smoke rose lazily, in the way the children ran and fell without worry, drew him in. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the desperate need to find a place that did not judge him for the man he had been. He stepped forward cautiously, making sure his movements were calm and deliberate, hoping to show that he meant no harm. It was then that she saw him. The Lakota woman, standing near one of the larger tents, noticed the stranger before anyone else did. There was a quiet strength in her presence, a calmness that seemed to make the world around her slower, steadier. She had seen many travelers pass through her people's lands, some seeking refuge, some seeking trouble. But there was something different about this man. His eyes, though wary and shadowed with pain, held a flicker of something she recognized, a question, a longing, a soul searching for a chance to be better than he had been. He stopped a few steps away, unsure of how to greet her. Words caught in his throat as he looked at the firelight flickering on her face. The warmth of the camp contrasted sharply with the coldness he had felt in his life, and for the first time in many years he felt the pull of something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The woman did not speak at first. She simply watched, her gaze steady but not unkind. She waited, as though giving him permission to be seen, to be recognized, to exist in this moment without judgment. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked a question that had been forming in his heart for as long as he could remember. "Do you think I'm worth saving?" The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling, like a bird unsure whether to fly or stay. There was no bravado in his voice, no attempt to hide the fear and shame that weighed so heavily upon him. For a long moment, the camp seemed to hold its breath, listening to the question as if the wind itself had paused to hear the answer. The Lakota woman took a step closer, her eyes soft but steady. She saw the truth in him, not the stories people told, not the fear he carried, but the man beneath it all, trembling, yet still standing, seeking a chance to change. Without speaking, she extended her hand slightly, an unspoken invitation to come closer, to sit by the fire, to let the warmth wash over him. The man hesitated, unsure if he had the right to accept such kindness, but something inside him, something he had buried long ago, urged him forward. He moved slowly, finally reaching the circle of light and warmth that the woman had created, and sank to the ground near the fire. The smell of burning wood and cooking food filled his senses, grounding him in the moment. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of calm, a quiet that was not filled with fear or expectation. The woman spoke then, her voice gentle, guiding him into the rhythm of the camp. She asked him simple questions, not about his past, not about his deeds, but about him, his journey, the people he had met, the landscapes he had seen. At first, his answers were short, careful, as if testing her patience or her willingness to listen. But as the sun dipped lower and the stars began to appear, he found himself speaking more freely, telling fragments of his story, sharing pieces of a life that had been heavy with regret. Around the fire, other members of the camp watched quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. They did not rush him, did not judge, did not offer pity. Instead, they offered presence, a reminder that sometimes simply being seen without fear or expectation could be a kind of salvation. The man listened to the crackling of the fire, to the soft murmur of voices in the distance, and felt a strange and new feeling, that perhaps he was allowed to belong, even if only for a night. As the evening deepened and the stars multiplied in the sky above, the man realized that he had never asked anyone this question before, and perhaps he had never truly expected an answer. And yet the simple act of asking, of speaking the words aloud, had lightened the weight on his shoulders just a little. The Lakota woman did not give him a simple yes or no. She only smiled softly and nodded, a gesture that spoke louder than any words could. In that nod, he felt a sense of possibility, a chance that maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back from the life he had led, a path toward being a man worthy of care and trust. He stayed by the fire that night, listening to the sounds of the camp, feeling the warmth of the flames on his face. He watched the children play, the adults move with purpose and care, and thought about the world he had left behind. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he could not yet imagine. But for the first time, he felt that he might not have to face it alone. He felt a thread of connection, a small but tangible hope that the question he had asked, the question that had shaken him to his core, might have an answer after all. As he closed his eyes that night, resting beside the fire and under the wide expanse of stars, he knew one thing with certainty. He had taken the first step. He had spoken aloud the question that had haunted him for years, and in doing so, had opened the door to a new possibility, a new chapter. The Lakota woman watched him quietly from a distance, her expression calm but attentive, knowing that the journey of healing and trust would not be easy. But she also knew that the willingness to ask the question, to seek a chance at redemption, was the beginning of a path that could lead to something extraordinary, not just for him, but for the people he might come to care for, and for the man he might become. And so, as the night settled softly over the plains, the man, the gunslinger, who had trembled with fear and doubt, found a small measure of peace. In the heart of a camp that welcomed him without judgment, he had asked the question that might save him, not from the world, but from himself. And though the journey had only just begun, for the first time he believed that maybe, just maybe, he was worth saving. The gunslinger sat near the fire, staring into the flickering flames, but his mind was not on the warmth or the light. Instead, it wandered through the long years of his life, through memories that came uninvited, like shadows creeping across the walls of a dark room. He had not spoken about these memories to anyone, not because he wanted to hide them, but because he had never known anyone who would understand. Most people only saw the face of a man who had survived by his own strength, who had walked alone through dusty towns and open plains. Few had ever asked about the person beneath the hardened exterior, the part of him that had longed for something he could never name. As a boy, he had grown up in a small, quiet town on the edge of the plains. Life had been simple but hard. His family had worked the land, rising before sunrise and returning home after long hours under the sun. There was laughter in those days, moments when he felt light and free, running through fields with other children, chasing butterflies, or climbing trees to see the wide horizon stretching out beyond the hills. But even then, he carried a restless spirit, a curiosity about the world beyond the hills, beyond the narrow streets of his town. He wanted adventure, something bigger than the life he saw before him. When he was old enough, he left his town and traveled across the plains seeking work, opportunity, and freedom. At first, it was exciting. He met new people, saw landscapes he had only imagined, and felt the thrill of independence. Yet, along with freedom came challenges he had not expected. Life on the open plains was not gentle. People he met were not always kind, and the choices he made sometimes led to pain and misunderstanding. Over the years, he became known as a man who could survive anywhere, who could handle problems in ways others could not. He learned to rely on his own judgment, to act quickly, and to move carefully in a world that did not always welcome strangers. Yet the skills he developed came at a cost. Every decision he had made to protect himself or survive had slowly built walls around his heart. He had begun to fear trust, to doubt kindness, and to question whether anyone could see the man he truly was. Even when he encountered people who offered friendship or guidance, he had pulled away, unsure if he deserved their care. His mind often replayed moments when he had acted in haste, words he had spoken in anger, or mistakes that had caused harm, and the weight of regret pressed down on him like an invisible burden. Despite all of this, there had been moments of clarity, brief sparks of realization that perhaps he could be more than the hardened, solitary figure the world expected him to be. Sometimes, when the plains were quiet, he would think of the people he had met, who had shown him even a small measure of kindness. A shopkeeper who had given him food when he had none, a traveler who had shared a fire for the night, a stranger who had offered advice without judgment. Each of these moments lingered in his memory, reminders that the world held more than fear and mistrust. But those moments were fleeting, and soon he had returned to the path he knew best, moving from town to town, relying on his own instincts, avoiding attachments that could tie him to anyone else. His life had become a series of days and nights that blurred together, marked by the endless horizon, the sound of the wind through the grass, and the solitude that had become his companion. He had accepted that this was his way of life, and for many years he believed he had no choice. Now, sitting near the Lakota woman's fire, he saw the contrast sharply. Here was a place where people lived with trust, with cooperation, and with quiet joy. They cared for each other, laughed together, and shared the work of life without suspicion or fear. It was a world he had always wanted, but had believed he could never belong to. Watching them, he felt a strange ache, a longing for connection, for a sense of home he had never truly known. The flames reflected in his eyes as he wondered if he could ever be part of a life like this, if he could ever let go of the walls he had built around himself. He thought about the mistakes he had made, the times when his actions had caused harm to others. Though he had survived each challenge, he had carried the burden of guilt quietly, letting it shape his choices and isolate him further. It was not just the world he had feared. It was the person he had become in that world. He had been strong, clever, and capable, but he had been lonely, unsure of how to reach out, unsure if he could trust anyone to see beyond the surface. And now, facing the calm acceptance of the Lakota woman and the people around her, he realized that the question he had whispered earlier, "Do you think I'm worth saving?" was not simply about them. It was about himself. For the first time, he began to consider that maybe worth was not something given by reputation or skill, but something recognized in the quiet moments of life, in trust offered and received, in the willingness to help and to care, in the courage to face oneself honestly. The Lakota woman had seen something in him that he had never allowed himself to see: potential for goodness, for change, for belonging. And her quiet, steady presence offered him a chance to explore that possibility. As night settled over the camp, the stars appeared one by one in the clear sky. He remembered nights in his youth when he had looked up at the same stars and wondered about the vastness of the world, imagining places he might go and people he might meet. Now, he looked at them again, and the feeling was different. Instead of fear or restlessness, he felt a strange sense of calm and curiosity. The world was still wide and uncertain, but perhaps it was not as lonely as he had always believed. He listened to the soft murmurs of the camp, the crackle of firewood, the quiet laughter of children, the gentle voices of adults speaking in care and respect. It was a sound that reminded him of the life he had longed for, a life of connection and belonging. He realized that the path he had taken, though difficult, had prepared him to appreciate this moment. He could see clearly now how far he had come and how much he had learned, not just about survival, but about himself. The gunslinger reflected on the choices that had led him here. He thought about the moments when he had acted with courage, the times when he had been clever, the times when he had shown kindness in small ways, even if they had gone unnoticed. Each memory, each action, seemed to connect to the present, like threads weaving a new pattern, one that suggested he could become a different man if he was willing to try. He also thought about the people he had met on the plains, some kind and some not, and how each had shaped him in some way. Some had taught him lessons about strength, others about caution, and some about the importance of listening and observing. The journey had been difficult, filled with uncertainty and solitude, but it had also prepared him for this moment, for the opportunity to be seen, understood, and accepted. As the fire continued to burn and the night grew deeper, the gunslinger felt a quiet resolve growing within him. He realized that he could no longer run from his past or from himself. He had to face the man he had become and decide who he wanted to be moving forward. The Lakota woman's presence, calm and unjudging, gave him a chance to start that process. She had offered him trust, a simple but profound gift, and in accepting it, he could begin to reshape his life, step by step. He wondered if he could truly change, if he could find a way to live without the fear and guilt that had defined him for so long. It was not an easy question, and he did not have an immediate answer. But for the first time, he felt that possibility was real. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, and the gentle wind through the camp seemed to whisper encouragement. as if the world itself acknowledged the first small step he had taken. Before sleep overtook him, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would try, not perfectly, not immediately, but sincerely, to be the man he had longed to be. He would seek trust, offer kindness, and learn to belong. He would face the mistakes of his past honestly, using them not as chains, but as lessons. And he would honor the chance given to him by the Lakota woman and the community she nurtured. This was not the end of his journey, but a beginning, a path toward hope, connection, and self-discovery. As he lay near the fire, listening to the soft rhythm of life around him, he finally allowed himself to feel a small measure of peace. For the first time in many years, he was not running. He was not alone. And though the road ahead would be long and uncertain, he had taken the first step towards something he had never thought possible, believing that he was worth saving. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and gold. A soft breeze moved through the camp, carrying the smell of fresh earth and smoke from the fires where breakfast was being prepared. The gunslinger awoke near the fire, his body stiff but his mind alert. For the first time in many years, he felt the pull of something different, a sense of responsibility, curiosity, and a quiet desire to belong. He had come to the camp unsure of what he would find, but now, after the night of reflection, he understood that belonging would not come without effort. He would have to prove himself, not through force or skill, but through trust, care, and patience. The Lakota woman approached him gently, her steps quiet on the soft grass. She did not speak harshly or demand anything from him, but she carried the air of quiet authority that made him listen without resistance. "The camp has work that must be done," she said simply. "If you are willing, you may help." The words were not commanding, yet they carried weight. They were an invitation, a chance to participate, and a subtle test of whether he could embrace life in a way he had never known. The gunslinger nodded, unsure if he was ready, but understanding that this was his opportunity. He followed her to a small garden at the edge of the camp, where women and children were tending rows of vegetables. They worked with care, planting seeds, watering young sprouts, and speaking quietly to one another. The woman handed him a small bundle of tools and gestured to the soil. "Start here," she said. "The earth teaches patience." At first, the gunslinger struggled. He had never worked a garden, never learned the quiet patience it required. His hands fumbled with the small trowel, and he worried he would make mistakes that could ruin the delicate plants. But the Lakota woman did not criticize him. Instead, she showed him gently how to loosen the soil, how to plant the seeds with care, and how to water without washing them away. As he worked, he began to notice the subtle rhythm of life in the garden, the tiny shoots reaching for sunlight, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the insects moving quietly among the plants. It was a world alive in ways he had never paid attention to, a world that demanded care, attention, and respect. As the hours passed, the gunslinger found himself slowing down, matching the rhythm of the camp. He spoke little, but he observed everything. The way the children helped each other, the way the adults shared tasks, the way the community moved with purpose and harmony. It was a world of connection, trust, and cooperation, and for the first time he realized that life could be meaningful without danger or fear. Each small success in the garden, planting a seed correctly, watering without damage, noticing the life around him, felt like a quiet victory, a proof that he could belong if he was willing to learn. Later that day, the woman sent him to help tend the animals. Chickens clucked as he approached, curious and cautious. He carefully fed them, filled their water bowls, and observed their movements. At first, the animals seemed unpredictable. and he feared he might frighten them. But as he spent time with them, he began to notice patterns, small signs of trust, and subtle ways to show care. Each day he learned that kindness required attention, patience, and presence. He could not demand obedience, only offer guidance and protection. It was a lesson in humility, one that contrasted sharply with the world he had known, where survival often relied on fear or speed. The gunslinger also spent time with the children, who were shy at first but gradually warmed to his presence. They asked questions, shared stories of their days, and sometimes laughed at his awkward attempts to join their games. He realized that children had a way of seeing beyond the walls he had built around himself. They did not judge him for the mistakes of his past. They only recognized his willingness to participate, to play, to be present. It was a revelation. He had never known that he could be accepted simply for trying, for showing care, and for being genuine. Even as he began to feel comfortable in the camp, the gunslinger's past lingered in the corners of his mind. He remembered the long years of solitude, the mistakes he had made, and the fear that people would never see him as anything but the man he had been. Yet each task, each interaction, began to shift something inside him. He realized that trust was not simply given, it was built slowly, through actions, consistency, and honesty. The camp offered him an opportunity to practice this trust, and with each passing day he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a little. One afternoon, the Lakota woman approached him again with a gentle smile. "Tomorrow, we will need help with a small project," she said. "It will require teamwork. Are you willing?" The gunslinger nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Teamwork had been foreign to him for so long. He had relied on himself, trusted no one, and avoided attachment. The idea of working closely with others, contributing to a shared goal, felt both challenging and hopeful. He realized that growth required stepping into discomfort, facing fears, and accepting guidance from those willing to share their wisdom. As evening approached, the gunslinger reflected on the lessons of the day. He had learned patience in the garden, care with the animals, and the beginnings of connection with the children. Each experience was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern of change. He understood that belonging was not about grand gestures or heroism. It was about consistency, attention, and care. The camp had shown him that he could exist in a space without judgment, where his presence alone mattered. That night, as he sat near the fire once more, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had taken steps toward trust, toward care, and toward connection. Steps that had once seemed impossible. The stars above were bright, and the wind carried the soft sounds of life in the camp. He realized that trust was not instant. It was fragile, built slowly through action and respect. And yet, he felt hope that he could continue this path, that he could participate in life in a way that had always felt beyond his reach. He thought about the question he had asked the Lakota woman the first night. "Do you think I'm worth saving?" Now, after a day of learning, helping, and observing, he understood that the answer was not simple. Worth was not a label given by others. It was recognized in the willingness to try, to learn, and to grow. Each act of care, each moment of trust, was a step toward demonstrating worth, not for anyone else, but for himself. The camp, he realized, was a living lesson in life and humanity. It taught him that community mattered, that small acts of kindness could have lasting effects, and that the courage to face oneself was as important as any skill he had acquired. He understood that he could not change the past, but he could shape the present and the future. By participating fully, by offering help, by listening, and by caring, he could become someone worthy of trust and belonging. Even as he rested that night, he felt a quiet nervousness about tomorrow. The teamwork project would be a greater challenge, requiring coordination, attention, and communication. But he also felt readiness, a sense that he could meet the challenge because he had already begun learning the principles that would guide him. The lessons of patience, care, and observation had taken root, and he knew that the next step would build upon them. As sleep approached, he allowed himself to imagine what life could be like if he continued on this path. He pictured the camp thriving, people working together, children laughing, and himself contributing in meaningful ways. He imagined himself waking each day with purpose, participating fully, and continuing to grow as a person. The possibility of belonging, which had seemed impossible before, now felt tangible, a goal worth striving for. The gunslinger closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire, one last time. The path ahead was not guaranteed, and there would be challenges he could not yet foresee. But he had learned that each step, each choice, each moment of care and trust mattered. And in that knowledge he found courage, a courage that came not from strength or fear, but from hope and the willingness to try. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new opportunities, and new challenges. But for tonight, he rested, grateful for the chance to learn, to belong, and to begin the slow process of transformation. The camp had offered him a gift far greater than comfort or safety. It had offered him the chance to become the person he had always wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that he might succeed. The next morning, the sky was pale blue, the sun rising slowly over the Anbus plains. The camp was alive with the gentle rhythm of morning chores. Water was drawn from the well, fires were stoked for breakfast, and the children ran barefoot across the soft grass, laughing as they played. The gunslinger rose early, feeling both anticipation and nervousness. Today would be different. He could sense it. The Lakota woman had asked him to help with a project that required teamwork, a challenge that would test not only his skills but his ability to trust and communicate with others. He walked through the camp, observing the people around him. There was a sense of purpose in every movement, a quiet harmony in the way everyone contributed. For the first time in his life, he felt like he could belong here, not as an outsider, but as part of a community, a small but meaningful piece of something larger. The woman approached him, holding a bundle of tools and a map of the task ahead. "Today we will work together to repair the irrigation system," she explained. "It is important for the garden and the animals. Each of us has a role, and each role matters. Are you ready?" He nodded, gripping the tools tightly. He had never done anything like this before. In his previous life, he had relied only on himself, acting quickly and decisively, often alone. The idea of working as part of a team was foreign, almost frightening. But he also felt a deep desire to succeed, to prove that he could be trusted, to show that he was learning the lessons the camp had been teaching him. He followed the woman to the edge of the garden, where several other members of the camp were already waiting. The task was not simple. The irrigation system had been damaged by a recent storm, and water no longer flowed evenly to all parts of the garden. Plants had suffered, and the animals needed consistent water to remain healthy. The community needed the system to function properly, and everyone's effort was required. The gunslinger listened carefully as the woman explained the plan. Some would repair the channels, some would adjust the valves, and some would ensure the water flow reached every corner. His role was to support where needed, moving supplies, observing the system, and helping others complete their tasks. At first, he struggled to coordinate with the others. He wanted to act quickly, to take control, but he realized that here, speed alone was not helpful. The project required patience, communication, and attention to detail. He had to listen, to observe, to wait for the right moment to act. Each time he hesitated, he felt a small surge of frustration. But then he reminded himself of the lessons from the garden and the animals. Care and patience were not signs of weakness. They were steps toward trust, toward belonging, toward becoming someone who could contribute meaningfully to the community. As the hours passed, he began to find his rhythm. He observed the way water flowed through the channels, noticing the smallest blockages and the subtle changes in the soil. He learned to communicate clearly with the others, offering suggestions gently and accepting advice in return. There were moments of miscommunication, moments when the water spilled or the channels needed to be adjusted again, but each mistake became an opportunity to learn and improve. Slowly, the system began to function more smoothly. The Lakota woman watched quietly, stepping in only when guidance was necessary. She had observed the gunslinger's progress since he had arrived, noting the changes in his demeanor, the careful way he approached tasks, and the small but steady signs of trust and cooperation. Today's challenge would reveal not only his skill, but his growth as a person. She did not doubt that he was capable of learning, but she knew that true change required facing difficulty, testing patience, and proving that he could contribute without dominating or retreating. By midday, the irrigation channels were nearly repaired, and the plants and animals were beginning to receive water again. The sun beat down warmly, and the gunslinger felt sweat on his brow and tiredness in his muscles. Yet he also felt satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that he had never experienced before. This was not about survival or proving himself in dangerous situations. This was about care, patience, and teamwork. Each small success reinforced the possibility that he could belong here, that he could contribute to something larger than himself. Then came a sudden challenge. A section of the channel had collapsed and water was beginning to flood part of the garden. Several members of the camp rushed to stop it, but coordination was needed to repair it quickly. The gunslinger felt a surge of anxiety. He could feel his old instincts urging him to act immediately, to take control and fix the problem alone, as he had done in the past. But he remembered the lessons he had learned: patience, observation, and collaboration. He took a deep breath, assessing the situation carefully, and then began to help others coordinate their efforts, directing water flow gently, while offering support where it was needed. For the first time, he experienced the strength of teamwork. He did not have to act alone. The people around him were capable, attentive, and willing to cooperate. By working together, they were able to repair the section efficiently and restore the water flow. The gunslinger felt a profound sense of relief and pride, not pride in himself alone, but pride in what could be achieved when people worked together with trust and care. The Lakota woman approached him once the crisis had passed, smiling warmly. "You have done well," she said softly. "You acted with patience, attention, and care. You have learned not only to work with others, but to trust yourself in this new way." Her words filled him with a quiet joy. He realized that the challenge had been more than physical. It had tested his ability to believe in others, to follow guidance, and to act with thoughtfulness rather than haste. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, the camp gathered to observe the completed work. The irrigation system now flowed smoothly, the plants drank steadily, and the animals had access to water. The gunslinger stood quietly, watching the fruits of their labor, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond accomplishment. He had faced a challenge that required more than skill. It required trust, patience, and courage, the courage to participate fully, to rely on others, and to prove that he could change. Children approached him shyly, offering him a small bouquet of wild flowers they had picked from the edges of the garden. Their laughter and smiles warmed his heart, and he realized that this simple gesture meant more than any reward he had ever received. He had become part of the community, not through fear, speed, or power, but through care, effort, and openness. The camp had welcomed him, and he had responded with trust, cooperation, and patience. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, the gunslinger sat once more near the fire. He reflected on the day's events, on the challenge he had faced, and on the lessons he had learned. For the first time, he understood that true courage was not about facing danger alone, but about facing oneself, trusting others, and acting with thoughtfulness. Each step he had taken, from planting seeds to caring for animals to repairing the irrigation system, had been a step toward a new life, a life that valued connection, responsibility, and care. The Lakota woman approached him quietly, settling beside him near the fire. "You asked a question when you first arrived," she said gently, "about whether you were worth saving. Today you have answered that question yourself, through your actions. Worth is shown in patience, care, and trust, not just in words or intentions." Her eyes met his, calm and steady, and he felt a warmth he had never known before. For the first time, the gunslinger truly believed that he could belong, that he could be trusted, and that he could grow into the person he had longed to become. The day had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. It had challenged his instincts, demanded patience, and asked for trust. And in meeting these challenges, he had discovered not only his own strength, but the strength of connection, cooperation, and community. As the night deepened and the stars appeared one by one, the gunslinger allowed himself to rest in this new understanding. The challenge had been difficult, yes, but it had shown him the value of patience, care, and trust. He had learned that being worthy was not about perfection, but about effort, learning, and openness. The camp had offered him guidance, the Lakota woman had offered him trust, and he had responded with courage and attention. Together they had accomplished something greater than any one individual could achieve alone. The wind carried the soft sounds of the camp, the quiet conversations of adults, the laughter of children, the gentle rustle of animals moving in their pens. The gunslinger closed his eyes, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. The world he had entered yesterday had been unfamiliar and uncertain, but through the challenges of today he had found a place where he could contribute, belong, and grow. He realized that the journey ahead would still have obstacles, but he now understood the principles that would guide him: patience, care, trust, and the willingness to act with thoughtfulness. For the first time in many years, he felt not just hope, but confidence. Confidence not in his skill alone, but in his ability to connect with others, to act with care, and to continue growing as a person. He had faced a true challenge and emerged not only intact but transformed, discovering that the question he had asked so long ago, "Do you think I'm worth saving?" was no longer something he needed to seek from others. He had begun to answer it himself. The next morning, the air was calm and clear. The plains stretched endlessly under a soft blue sky, dotted with the warm glow of the rising sun. The camp was alive again, filled with soft laughter, the smell of cooking, and the gentle hum of activity. Birds sang in the distance, and the faint sound of water moving through the irrigation channels added a steady rhythm to the morning. The gunslinger awoke near the fire, feeling a quiet peace he had never known. His hands no longer trembled as they had on his first day. The shaking had not disappeared entirely, but it was no longer a sign of fear or despair. It was a reminder of the growth he had begun and the courage it had taken to face himself. He looked around the camp, observing the people moving with purpose and care. Children played near the edges of the tents, sharing stories and games. Adults prepared food, repaired equipment, and tended to the animals. The Lakota woman approached him quietly, carrying a basket of herbs. She smiled as she noticed him watching the flow of life around him. "Ah, today you will help with the final preparations for the seasonal celebration," she said gently. "It is a day of sharing, of gratitude, and of connection. Everyone has a role, and yours is important." The gunslinger nodded, feeling both nervousness and excitement. This was more than a task. It was a test of everything he had learned. The previous days had taught him patience, care, and trust, but now he would participate in an event that celebrated community, joy, and togetherness. It was a world he had never known before, a world where contribution and kindness mattered as much as skill or knowledge. For the first time, he felt that he could truly belong, not as an observer, but as a participant. He followed the woman to a gathering area near the center of the camp. Others were already arranging decorations, preparing food, and organizing activities. His task was to help set up a seating area and ensure that everything was ready for the ceremony. At first, he moved carefully, unsure of where to place each item. But he soon realized that the work was not about perfection. It was about attentiveness, observation, and willingness to help. He listened to the guidance of the woman and the other adults, asking questions when needed, and gradually found a rhythm that allowed him to contribute meaningfully. As the preparations continued, the gunslinger reflected on how far he had come. Only a few days ago, he had entered the camp unsure if he was even worthy of trust, let alone belonging. Now, he worked alongside others seamlessly, participating in the flow of life without fear or hesitation. He had learned that contribution was not about control, but about presence, attentiveness, and care. Every task, no matter how small, mattered to the larger whole. The realization filled him with a quiet sense of pride, not pride in himself alone, but in the shared effort of the community. Children approached him shyly, carrying small bundles of flowers. They asked if he would help place them near the gathering area. At first, he hesitated, worried that he might make a mistake or fail to meet their expectations. But then he remembered the lessons of patience, observation, and care he had learned in the garden and with the irrigation system. He knelt down, arranging the flowers gently, noticing the colors, shapes, and scents. The children watched closely, their faces lighting up with smiles and laughter. He realized that his presence, attentiveness, and effort mattered more than perfection. By midday, the camp was ready. The seating area was arranged, the food prepared, and decorations placed thoughtfully. The people gathered, sharing quiet conversations, laughter, and anticipation for the celebration. The gunslinger stood slightly apart, observing the scene, feeling a sense of calm and belonging that he had never known before. He understood now that true connection required participation, attention, and care. It was not about being the strongest, the fastest, or the cleverest. It was about showing up, contributing, and trusting in the shared effort. The Lakota woman approached him, her eyes calm and steady. "You have learned much," she said softly. "You have faced your fears, trusted others, and shown care. Today is a celebration of life and connection, and you are part of it." Her words filled him with a warmth he had never experienced. For the first time, he truly felt recognized, not for his past, but for who he was becoming. He had taken responsibility for his own growth, and the camp had offered him guidance and trust along the way. As the celebration began, the gunslinger joined in fully. He helped serve food, assisted the children with games, and participated in the music and storytelling. The sound of laughter, singing, and conversation surrounded him, creating a rhythm of life that felt both new and familiar. He noticed the small gestures of kindness between people, a helping hand, a shared smile, a word of encouragement. Each moment reinforced the lessons he had learned, that patience, care, and trust were more powerful than fear, isolation, or pride. He found himself thinking about the question he had asked on his first night in the camp. Do you think I'm worth saving? Now, he realized that the answer did not depend solely on others. Worth was not something given or taken. It was recognized through action, effort, and care. By participating fully, by trusting others, and by showing attentiveness and kindness, he had begun to demonstrate his worth, not only to the camp, but to himself. Each small act of contribution, each moment of presence, was an affirmation that he could belong, that he could grow, and that he could be trusted. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the community gathered near the fire for the final part of the celebration. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and the children danced with joy. The gunslinger sat quietly, observing the harmony around him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He thought of the journey that had brought him here, the long years of solitude, the mistakes he had made, the fear and doubt that had haunted him. And he realized that those experiences, difficult as they had been, had prepared him for this moment. They had taught him patience, humility, and the value of care, lessons that he would carry forward for the rest of his life. The Lakota woman approached him once more, this time placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You have faced yourself, and you have grown, she said softly. Life is a journey of learning, and today you have shown courage, care, and trust. You are worthy, not because of what you were, but because of who you are becoming. Her words touched him deeply. He had never heard such affirmation in his life, never felt the kind of acceptance that allowed him to truly see himself as capable of goodness and belonging. For the first time, he felt a sense of completion, not the end of his journey, but the end of a chapter filled with fear, doubt, and isolation. He had begun to transform, learning to participate, care, and trust. The camp had offered him guidance and trust, and he had responded with effort, attentiveness, and courage. He understood that growth was not instantaneous. It was built step by step, moment by moment. Each action mattered. Each choice shaped the path forward, and each effort of care strengthened his sense of belonging. As night fell and the stars appeared once again above the plains, the gunslinger sat quietly near the fire, reflecting on all he had learned. The camp was peaceful, filled with the gentle rhythm of life and the warmth of connection. He realized that he had discovered something far more valuable than safety or comfort. He had discovered the power of trust, patience, and care. He had learned that true courage was not about acting alone, but about participating fully, offering kindness, and facing oneself honestly. The wind carried the soft sounds of the celebration, the laughter of children, the gentle conversation of adults, and the rustle of animals moving in the pens. The gunslinger closed his eyes, letting the moment settle deep within him. He understood now that life was not about isolation or fear. It was about connection, growth, and contribution. He had asked a question on his first night, trembling and unsure. Do you think I'm worth saving? And now, he realized that the answer had been within him all along. Worth was not something others gave. It was something recognized through action, care, and effort. By showing patience, attentiveness, and trust, he had begun to answer that question himself. Before sleep overtook him, he made a quiet promise. He would continue on this path, practicing care, trust, and attention. He would participate fully in life, contribute to the well-being of others, and embrace the lessons he had learned at the camp. He would face challenges with patience, act with kindness, and trust in the strength of connection. And he would remember that worth was not about past mistakes, but about the effort to grow, to belong, and to care. As he drifted to sleep beneath the wide expanse of stars, the gunslinger felt a sense of peace and possibility unlike anything he had ever known. The camp had offered him guidance, the Lakota woman had offered him trust, and he had responded with effort, courage, and care. Together, they had created a space where he could belong, grow, and discover his true potential. The journey ahead would continue to have challenges, but he now understood that he was capable of facing them with patience, trust, and kindness. In that quiet, star-filled night, the gunslinger realized that the path to belonging and redemption was not about avoiding mistakes or seeking approval. It was about showing up, contributing, learning, and trusting, both in oneself and in others. He had asked a question in a moment of fear, and through the patience, care, and trust he had cultivated, he had begun to answer it. He was worthy, he was capable, and he had found a place where he truly belonged.